Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much indeed for coming. I'd like to welcome you to this event that's connected to Transcending Boundaries. This is becoming an annual event organised by Aabru to particularly focus on artists based in Nigeria, artists who are perhaps well known to many of you in the room, but perhaps not all. The work that surrounds us, of course, and it's fantastic to have this regular focus on these artists and other artists who were a different selection last year, so that we can become, I think, in the UK particularly more familiar with both the work, the concerns that the artists are discussing, and perhaps the trends and what's happening in contemporary art in Nigeria today. But today's event is pioneers in the world of African art. So we have, I think, 56 countries to choose from, huge continent. But I think before we start off the discussion, as chair, I'm Tessa from Iniva, the Institute of International Visual Arts. I'm based in the East End in a David Adjaye designed building. And I think Andrew invited me to chair this as we, from time to time, show contemporary artists from Africa, not necessarily Nigeria, and artists who have something to say about the society we live in. And in showing that work, there has been, over recent years, enormous interest in what's happening. And it was fantastic to have the Art Fair 154 last year. Many people, including the panel beside me, have been working with artists from Africa for a long time. So it's not about a discovery, but it's about an ongoing journey of what's happening, who's working, what's being said. And so I think we hope that the afternoon will be an interesting exchange of knowledge, information, but also perhaps some comments about what's happening. But before we kick off on a bit of a discussion, I'd like to ask each of the panel to introduce themselves. I think they'll do a better job than I could, and they'll particularly highlight things that they'd like you to know. So can I hand the mic to Chris Spring from the British Museum?
Hi, I'm Chris Spring. I hope you can all hear me. I don't particularly like using a microphone. Can you hear me? Great. I'm an artist, but I'm also lucky enough to be chief curator at the Africa Galleries at the British Museum. And I'm a lifer at the British Museum. And I started working in the Africa section way back in 1987. We were not working with contemporary artists then. And I think there was a certain vision of Africa which was sort of frozen in time in a way. And it was not until 1995 that we started working with two artists, Sakari Douglas Camp, born in Kalabari in Nigeria, and Magdalene Odundo, born in Kenya. They're both of them now working in the UK. And for me as an artist, this gave me the green light. And I started doing field work in different parts of Africa, to start with in North Africa. So that by the time the Africa Galleries at the British Museum opened in 2001, we had 4 artists working in our collection. So that was enough for me to introduce people to the arts of Africa through the work of contemporary artists. Nowadays, we have more than 20 artists whose work is on show in the galleries, but many more artists in the collection. I think there's something like 300 works by artists, contemporary artists from Africa now. And it's very much an ongoing thing. A little bit later on, I'll say how I've worked with those artists and actually what they bring to those displays at the British Museum, but basically that's me.
Thank you, Chris. Now it gives me huge pleasure to hand the microphone over to Abiodun Olaku from Nigeria, whose work is over there behind you, and who has been over here for a little while, I think, while the show was installed. Abiodun, would you like to tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Abiodun Olaku. Nigerian, a full-time artist, a professional artist. I have affiliation with a few groups and associations back in Nigeria. I'm a member of the Society of Nigerian Artists. I'm a trustee of the guild also, and a founding member. And an executive member of the Universal Studios of Art in Lagos, which for about 3 decades now has been, through its own activities, mentoring coming generations of artists, paving the way for them in terms of choosing careers in the professional field. And there's so many other things, especially trying to project Nigerian art beyond our immediate circle. And we're very glad that the Nigerian artists here present, and a few others met Mrs. Aabru along the way, and her organization, Aabru Art. She's lent her force, the platform to help us more clearly, more coordinatedly present Nigerian art, especially from our own perspective, because we were concerned at the time that what happened on the contemporary stage in Nigeria was not comprehensively presented to the world. And I've been here a few times now as afforded us the opportunity to make the picture clear. We can answer so many questions that Fona had followed the world about art, which had moved on from the ancient period to the contemporary periods. So we're here to shed more light on our activities and our projections for the future of Nigeria.
Thank you, Abiodun. And now I'd finally like to introduce Giles Peppiatt from Bonhams.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You can hear me, but I, like Chris, am a lifer in this business. But I bow to his superiority because I started in '89, so you've got 2 years on me, Chris. No, I've been involved in the auction world for quite some time, but I run the, I'm director of modern and contemporary African art at Bonhams, and we've been holding sales in this area for 6 years now. When we started 6 years ago, it was really a very unknown backwater, and it's been an extremely interesting journey for us. We are the only international auction house, the only major auction house doing any work in this field. And I will say the past 2 years, we've seen a huge change in the market and certainly in the reception and the way the sales have gone and the way the market has improved. 6 years ago, it was very different, and we certainly had a very different reception for our first album, which was pretty tough, I would say, but that's how these things change. I think now it is a wonderfully exciting and vibrant market with lots of new artists and also lots of existing artists, and their works are performing extremely well at auction. So for us, it's a very exciting time to be involved in this market.
Thanks, Giles. It's fine to be kind of, if you like, chef with the ingredients today. I was thinking about the meaning of the title of this discussion is Pioneers in the World of African Art. I was thinking about what do we mean by the word pioneers, and I thought we just had a little bit of discussion about what we mean, because that can, it's obviously perhaps people leading off on something, it's people who start something off, but that could be within the last year, or it could have been 100 years ago. And I think artists as pioneers, if I think across my knowledge of parts of different art histories, not just African art history, that can mean so many things. It can often mean an introduction to a certain style, certain materials. It can mean perhaps collaborating in groups in a particular way. It can also mean how artists contribute a huge amount to education and art education. And if we look at Nigeria, art was introduced to secondary schools in, I believe, 1927. And how, from that point on, that it meant that the position of art was very, very different. And how that was then introduced, and the famous Nigerian artist, Ben in one room, how he then became part of the government in encouraging education in schools, then became part of the curriculum for teacher training colleges, and it moved steadily forward in terms of how art was both discussed, how it was part of education, and how then artists started to be trained at Yaba College and various others, and many of the artists here. And the catalogue certainly gives you their backgrounds as to where they were trained and how important that is. So the word pioneer, can I ask my panel particular thoughts as to what that might mean? Can I first of all perhaps ask our artist?
Yeah, it's a privilege. It's a good question. I think the scholars, the historians, are probably in a better position to go into the delicate depth, the history of art in Nigeria, because it's their special area. But I can gloss over, the facts of history there, because along the line I became part of the history. I'm still contributing my lot to what becomes history, not in Nigeria. And when you look back, I think it's a great honor privilege to be an artist and to be a person who will, outlive life on this plane. Your work continues to be after you. And it's great because of those things we read about, the old masters and our old local masters form part of the inspiration for us to decide to be full-time artists. Especially coming from the environment where we are, it's a bit hostile, to choosing this career. It's a very delicate one. But we'll look at the analysis of the word pioneer from different angles. I'm going to look at some of the special areas where I participated. I finished school in 1981 under one of my masters there, called him Doctor, how we are present. And at that time, it was a bit difficult to decide to be a full-time professional, because really there wasn't an industry out there that would inspire us. We are like children of circumstance, because along the line, when I look back, things just fell in place. I encountered the National Collection, Nigeria, and the National Gallery of Modern Art, where I was employed as a cultural officer after I finished my national service. And in the course of working there, I made this wonderful collection of the great masters I had read about and studied in school. It was such a beautiful collection, but unfortunately at that time, the National Collection was being taken care of as a section of the Department of Culture in the Ministry of Culture, and it didn't receive the adequate attention in terms of storage, preservation, and projection to the world. But my encounter with that collection changed a lot of things for me. And by the 6th year, I've been practicing in my spare time. I decided to take the plunge, and I resigned from employment. Even though at that time it was quite risky. Because it wasn't popular then, I didn't tell my mom. I lost my dad early on that I was now jobless. But I think enough had happened along the line to give me hope that I could survive as an artist. We were given an opportunity along the line to exhibit with the masters in 1985. It's a very important exhibition, often to the gods, which featured the likes of Professor Willow, Professor Olaku, and big names. But as young artists, given the opportunity, we jumped at it and gave the best shot. Since then, it's been no looking back. But there began at that time a convergence of young minds, at the National Theatre where we were housed. I went on ground to senior artists, Mr. Peppiatt, and Mr. Monty Abiodun, both used to think about these people have been living on art for quite a while, they could survive. So it gave me hope. Along the way, my colleague came around, Mr. Olaku, a wonderful sculptor, joined forces with us, and he never took employment at all. To cut a long story short, by the time we got to about the mid-90s, we had a very powerful collective of artists, but we were ejected from where we are. And we took the new spirit and formed a union called the Universal Studios of Art, still resident at the National Academy. And that was where we became more focused about our professional activities. And through our contribution with all modesty, many galleries and art businesses sprang up because they relied on us for resources, and ideas and collaborations. And that was how the art industry really had its own in Nigeria. But economically, the environment was simply a bit poor. To guarantee reasonable livelihood for full-time artists. And in the process, we lost so many of our colleagues to the diaspora where they sought economic relief. Incidentally, quite a lot of them are here in the UK, and they've been to this show. They always received us very well. That we held on where many others could not, and the grace of God, being able to take art to this level, projecting at the world stage, shedding more light because in the past the exposure was limited. So those are some of the pioneering roles we played.
So you and your colleagues here are some of the pioneers.
Yes,
I'd like to turn now to trials, because I think we also many sites and pioneers that take us a little further back from today.
Thank you, yes. I'll certainly try. The first thing I would say is that when I was thinking about modern contemporary African art, I realised that it is still very much unknown. It's still a very small area. So in some ways, I would say that in some ways all of you here are pioneers, because there are very few people who are involved in this market, and for you to all come to an event like this proves that. I mean, Anshu here holding such an event as a pioneer. I see Victoria here who organised the 154 fair, another pioneer. There are so many, all of you here to come, I think, is a great thing, actually. And one has to remember that the market is still small, it is still relatively unknown and unexplored. That being said, the area that we tend to concentrate on, certainly in commercial terms, is perhaps the earlier artists, and of those mentioned earlier, someone like Bonhams, who was a true pioneer of Nigerian and African art. He studied at Slade in the late 40s, was probably the first Nigerian to study there. And the very fact that we sold a group of his sculptures in our sale last year for over £400,000 really shows where he's come from that. And we have many other works in our future sets. So he is someone who has really stood the test of time as a pioneer. He was an artist who was amazingly gifted in what he did and versatile. I mean, he not only painted in oil and watercolour, but his sculptures are exquisite, as these are the ones we sold. So he's certainly someone I would very strongly count as a pioneer. His work isn't so often seen in galleries because his work is quite tightly held and people don't let it go very much. So we don't see as much, and certainly you'll see the artists around here probably more often. Another artist of a similar generation, though that's still alive, is a gentleman called Mr. Grillo, Professor Grillo, who is also a wonderful contemporary artist, and in fact has started painting again, I hear, and has an exhibition planned in Lagos. I think either it's just taking place, is it just taking place, or is it going to take place? But I certainly heard he's got done one plan. Is it taking place? It's going to, that's right. And it would be wonderful to see what his new works are. I mean, I commercially, I think he was at the height of his power, certainly in the 60s. And some exquisite works came out of his studio at that time, works of great delicacy. I mean, he was very much an oil painter, a painter who didn't really involve in sculpture, and also was someone who was amazingly painstaking and would be very reluctant to let her work out of his gallery until he was entirely sure it was complete and correct. So therefore his output is very low. But certainly I see some of these artists who are perhaps some side of dead, some perhaps at the end of their time, as the true pioneers. Now, as I said, I think Abiodun mentioned some pioneers of today, and I'm sure Chris will mention other artists. The certain ones that we see most, and the area that I get involved in, which is the secondary market, they tend to be the earlier artists, and also necessarily because they are the artists of slightly greater value that we tend to concentrate on. Turning to other countries, I mean, we mentioned Nigeria a lot because it is the economic powerhouse of sub-Saharan Africa, and not wanting to seem too cynical about it, but art and money are entwined, and you can't ever forget that, I'm afraid. And the wealth in Nigeria has spawned and formed an art market that is very strong, and that is driven by the money that has been made in Nigeria. But there are other markets, and certainly I know that there was an auction in Kenya last year, the first ever contemporary art auction in Kenya. I actually attended, it seemed to go very well. And there are some wonderful pioneers there, Kello and Soy and such like, who are painting wonderful works, and it's not easy to even start. I will say that I think some of the most important work that's been done actually has been done by the galleries in Africa, because certainly in some of these countries the gallery system is yet to be fully developed, as it is perhaps here in London and New York, and what we would call traditional art markets. And it's, one has to, though they are in some ways the other side of the fence from us, one has to realise the benefit that they bring. And a gallery will do an enormous amount of benefit to an artist. Fine, there has to be a relationship there and a contract and perhaps some restriction of supply and where they can sell the works. But a gallery will promote, it will also edit works, terribly important, and it will invest money in the artist to promote that artist. And that, the benefit of that relationship is still not perhaps being seen throughout Africa and by a lot of the African artists. So that's something that I think is very important that gets further in Africa. And I think Anshi is doing a great job doing this here in London, and there are other galleries doing it in sub-Saharan Africa, be it Kenya, Uganda, and Lagos. It's also very encouraging to see the new artists coming forward. One was wonderfully encouraged in all sorts of ways, surprised to see Angola winning the Olympic d'Or. It was a wonderful thing for that country, and Edson Chagas. And I think fully deserved. I happened to go and see the exhibition there, the show there, and it was a wonderful stand. It was extraordinary, and they deserved it. Every penny that they deserved. So I think there is an enormous amount of hope. I think there's an enormous amount that can be done. As I said, one sometimes can be enclosed in a bubble and not see outside of it. One has to realise, as I said, this is a small market, but I think the more that can be done, and the more pioneers like yourselves here can be involved, the more it can grow and prosper.
Well, thank you. I think what's interesting about the panel, not only do we have the most important of all an artist, but we actually represent perhaps slightly different parts of the same world. And we were saying before the panel started that what's important is how we all collaborate and work together. I work in a not-for-profit organisation, so in the sense that I work with artists, I commission artists, we sometimes sell work, really for the artists. I mean, artists do need to live, do need to eat. But we will often present work which is perhaps by artists who come from somewhere in the world, certain parts of Africa, where there is very little commercial art world, and selling work is a challenge, and trying to get their work seen is a challenge. And I think in terms of what Chris does is very much, I'm going to speak for himself, but in terms of making sure that important works are part of our museums and galleries for the long term, so that whether you're still at school or whether you're visiting as a tourist, you can see key works in London that have been made in particular parts of Africa. And I think what's important is whether it's at 1954, the art fair that was at Sunset House last year, whether it's through Bonhams and the auctions, whether it's at Iniva, we're coming to see a particular exhibition showing a Senegalese artist in May or June, July, called Issa Sam, a significant artist who has never been shown in the UK before. I think all of us kind of contribute to the discussion of what's happening and the ability of artists to be able to know that their work is going to be seen, going to be discussed, and what they're discussing in the work being part of the bigger discussion. And I'm going to hand over to Chris to talk a little bit about pioneers. Back to the word. Chris.
I won't have that. I didn't look up the meaning of the word pioneer in the dictionary before I did this talk, but for me I think it's just somebody who happened to be in the right place at the right time. And we're talking about now we're able to see great contemporary works of art from Africa. Last year there were 3 exhibitions at Tate Modern, for example. Meshach Gaba, Ibrahim El-Salahi, and Alan Gallagher, African-American lady. There was interesting work shown at the Africa Centre as well. There are 3 or 4 new galleries that have opened over the last 2 or 3 years showing contemporary works. For me as a curator, as I say, I've continued my practice as an artist. And I could quite easily not be here. It's just the art school I went to after university. My mum persuaded me to go to this art school. I was sick of education. And it went bust. And the guy I was with at art school with, his girlfriend happened to be the secretary of the Anthropological Institute that had their library in the Museum of Mankind. And there was a job going 2 days a week making coffee for the librarian. Oh, I needed the money. I didn't, to be absolutely honest, know very much about the arts of Africa. The first book I pulled off the shelf was called Sailing from Lamu. It was about the dhow trade in the Indian Ocean. I thought, wow, yeah. From that point on, I was hooked. And I just worked my way from like a maggot in the middle of an apple, not quite to the surface. Because when I first went to Tanzania, I was told there are no textile traditions there. By a learning colleague at the British Museum. I woke up, went to Dar es Salaam market, thousands of women wearing these fabulous kangas. What's this if it isn't a textile tradition? They are made in a factory, maybe in India. But it's a wonderful tradition, driven by African taste and patronage. Whenever I've worked in Africa, artists are the first people I've gone along to. Sometimes get my wrists slapped by my museum colleagues for contacting them rather than people in the museum. But they're the people who actually know what I'm interested in, contemporary art, and actually doing what artists have done and helped me to do. And that, now I'm going to go back a little while to 1995, Africa 95. We just started to work with commissioned pieces from Sakari Douglas Camp. Incidentally, her work, her wonderful work, We Were Brave, is in St. Paul's Cathedral at the moment. You can go in without paying and still see them, but if you want to pay, you can see them up close. But we worked with her and with Magdalene Adundo, a ceramicist. And both their works have been in the Africa galleries at the British Museum from the word go. Those galleries, though, didn't open until 2001. But that short amount of time I spent working with Sakari and Magdalene, and also the field work I'd done in Egypt and Tunisia, because I was sent off to North Africa and told to mind my own business. Everybody else was working in Nigeria and Ghana. Actually, it was a very good thing that happened to me, because it gave me a feeling for the whole continent. And you'll find that people try to kind of cut bits off Africa. This is the way Africa is often presented in the news, almost as a single sub-Saharan country. I call it the Sarah Palin view of Africa. Remember which one? And for me, that was just the same. And I found out, actually, Going off to North Africa, I was terribly angry. I wanted to be in Nigeria and Ghana. I got there in the end, but it took me a long time. But it gave me a feeling for the whole continent. And when it came to 2001, we had the work of 4 artists. Khalid Ben Slimane from Tunisia. We had Chantal Hadissin from Egypt, Sakari Douglas Camp and Magdalene. For me, that was enough. People said, oh, you must have the Ife head, or you must have a wonderful wood sculpture. I'd learned that artists can actually mediate the kind of exhibition that we have at the British Museum. Now, my brief as a curator and acquiring contemporary art is quite different from a curator at Tate Modern, for example, who perhaps would like to collect from the roots of modernism to the present day. The artists that I acquire, and there may be artists who are not well known at all, or artists who have since become well known, artists who can bring a kind of dynamism often to long-standing traditions. Traditions which often in museums were very culpable for this, but so were avant-garde artists from the turn of the century like Picasso, who presented a kind of picture of Africa and African art as sort of frozen in time. We call it the ethnographic present. And suddenly working with artists, this frozen block is suddenly blown apart, wide apart. Because these are artists, dynamic artists, working today in all sorts of traditions, one way and another. Whether it be wood sculpture or metalwork or textiles or ceramics, you name it. And they suddenly freed up these traditions so people could look from now to the distant past often. And that was the story I wanted to show as a curator. I wanted to get rid of the stereotypes of Africa that I had been brought up on. And how do I do that as a curator? With simply the collections that we had in the British Museum, which actually come from just a tiny snapshot of time in Africa. The vast majority from the colonial period. And then suddenly here are these artists who are making all this wonderful art history kind of joined up. Magnificent. I worked with an artist called Taslim Martin. His father is Yoruba, his mother from St. Kitts in the Caribbean. And another artist called Leo Asamoah he was born in Benin, but he's been working in the States, and those 2 artists brought particular perspectives on our collections from Benin, for example. Sakari Douglas Camp brought a perspective, and I've just been talking with Fidelis about how she brought a particular perspective to Masquerade, for example. But also a perspective to how somebody like Picasso picked up one of the Otobo masks that she's portrayed in her figure in the Africa galleries and said, this is wild and free creativity. This is just what I want. I want to get away from all this convention in Europe. And as he did that, he branded this primitive. Actually, what he was seeing was very slowly changing conservative traditions. And that, with Sakari's work, with original wood masks carved 150 years before the piece that Sakari is looking at, you can see that this tradition is not something that's kind of wild and free creativity. It's not primitive in any sense of the term. It's actually a very slowly changing conservative tradition, exactly what Picasso wanted to get away from. But he was misreading Africa. He was misreading African art. From that sprang all sorts of negative ideas, first of primitivism, and racism comes into it. So Sakari is actually knocking back one of these really pernicious things that we had still in our society. Knocking it back, knocking it on the head. When I worked in Dar es Salaam, I then made my way kind of down the coast through Mozambique. And there was a little exhibition actually in Yoxo town. And it was a cold January day, just after the Africa galleries had opened. My friend Elspeth Cork from SOAS said, you must go along and see this. And it was metalwork from Mozambique, but a particular kind of metalwork. Sculptures made from guns. guns from the Civil War. And there was one particular piece there. It was a chair, since become known as the throne of weapons, made mainly out of AK-47s. Extraordinarily powerful piece. And through that, I knew nothing about the war in Mozambique. Again, only just what news pictures told me. It's one of those kind of visions of Africa. And through this throne, through this chair, I began to learn about this so-called civil war. It actually wasn't a civil war at all. At that time, in 1975, when Mozambique gained independence, it was the height of the Cold War. Russia and the US, they were pulling Africa apart, just as the Europeans had done 100 years before. And Mozambique, independent Marxist African country, sandwiched between apartheid South Africa and Rhodesia to north-south and the north, they didn't want that to exist. So these forces outside the country poured guns into the country. This terrible war that we just saw on the TV. We just saw Africans killing each other. And I learned through this more about that wonderful story and the people who were brave to stand up against this culture of violence. And I suddenly realized, actually, these sculptures are more than a sculpture. They're actually a memorial to the brave people who stood up against the culture of the gun. They're the people who won that war. The history books will tell you the UN brokered a peace, that Frelimo won the war. No, it was the people of Mozambique who won the war. You know, in the past we weren't able to go into politics in the British Museum. No, don't go down that line, it's a bit dangerous, you know. We must engage with politics now. Artists help me as a curator to do that. So I don't have to have a panel on the wall talking about this sculpture. In a way it says what I want to say itself. Okay, we're helped by videos and so on and so forth. But there are many artists. Some of them have become very, very well known. Ellen Atchery, his very first two of these wonderful sculptures made out of liquor bottle tops. We were just lucky enough, I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. And Manscloth is there and introduces you, along with 3 other works, to the works, the wonderful works of African art that we have elsewhere in the galleries. So it's gone on from there, and it's been a great, great privilege to work all over Africa, almost always with artists, sometimes supporting triangle art workshops, one in Kumasi, one in Lagos, one in Maputo and Mozambique. And through that, a great network begins to grow up. Artists who, they may not become well known in their lifetime, but they're doing an amazing job, not just through the beauty of their art, but through what they're saying to people like me. And I said, that first kanga that I bought from Dar es Salaam, it had a slogan on it. I bought it because it was far away from a certain idea of African art. And you can imagine, it was actually more like a Damien Hirst spot painting, just had red and blue circles on it. Printed in India, not even printed in Africa. But it had 2 little words, Juu Kitu. A Kiswahili slogan, as all kangas do. I didn't know what this meant. And I asked my friend George, what does this mean, George? He said, you know nothing. I said, I know nothing, George, but Juu Kitu, what does it mean? It means, you know nothing. Kiswahili. And I said, yeah, that's me. That's me, the pioneer. I just happened to be here at the right time, at the right place. Since then, these things have been rather ignored by my learned colleagues. People are writing PhDs of 350 pages and God knows what. But actually, if it hadn't been through the artists, and in this case it was Robino and Kilo, the Tanzanian artists, who showed me, I've never seen. Anyway, enough. I hope that's
What an appropriate piece of cloth comes by as your first one.
The day this and I were talking, there was some sort of fuss going on at the British Museum, and I forgot to put it in my rucksack. Next time, you'll see it in my book. Have a good day.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. You've touched on a number of things which, for me, thinking about the pioneers, I actually wrote down a list of artists. They come from all across Africa. And I think what unites them is what they're talking about. They're talking about very, very different things. But they're talking about things that are very specific to their lives. And they enable me or other viewers of their work to have some sense of what's important to them, their societies, maybe to do with particular traditions. Some of it, certain artists, is connected to the politics in which they're surrounded by, sometimes political politics. And recently at Iniva we showed an extraordinary artist last year called Peter Clark. Some of you may know his work. He's now 84, still a practicing artist, based on a township on the edge of Cape Town. And he declared to his family when he was 18 years old back then, I want to be an artist. And at the time, apartheid had not quite been legislated, but was moving relentlessly towards being a status in which everybody would have to live. It was completely unheard of and not just unusual, but kind of unique scenario. But he was driven on by another artist that some of you will know of, Gerald Sakota. Extraordinary artist. He's the first black artist in South Africa brought by a public museum. So Gerald Sakota drove on Peter Clark, who then gave up his job in the shipyards when he was 26 to then become a full-time practicing artist. For him, life was quite precarious economically. He would sell a few works. He showed his works within various spaces connected to newspapers, because often the galleries were not available to him, and any commercial galleries that existed weren't particularly interested in his work. But what's extraordinary in his work is the kind of the times he's lived through, and what it allows you to glimpse at. And the work is extraordinarily poignant because much of it is witty and sharp, and even though, of course, what he was witnessing, what he had to endure himself was, man's inhumanity to man. But this work lives on now. We did the first solo show here in London. And what was fantastic for me was getting school kids from Hackney Town Hamlets coming to see this work, who had kind of no sense of apartheid as a word, and they had some sense of what that might mean. But then to be able to discuss what it means, where it might still exist today, and to talk about it through the work of Peter's work, and to have him talking direct to them, was an extraordinary experience. And so I think and I hope from that comes another pioneer, some kid who's 9 years old at the moment, who says, when I'm in my 90s, I went and saw Peter Clark's work. Because it is that extraordinary. It's what is spurred on by what have you found? You may not be so pioneering, but what have you recognised in somebody else's work as an artist? But I want to hand back to you and ask you, who for you has kind of at certain points of your life, making your own work, really encouraged you on to do what you do? Who are the ones who have been the artists that have kind of touched you to drive yourself on?
Okay. It's a bit difficult to put into one artist, but I think the most profound experience for me was reading about the life of Vincent van Gogh. And I tried to put myself in his position. Would I have been able to continue at a certain point? Because as individuals who went through the process of becoming full-time artists, with a difficult beginning, especially coming from our environment with its fluctuating economic situation. I think we had no love than Van Gogh, and I always wondered what those reports. I think that was one great artist, and the video also the artists will be trying to be out and continue to express themselves passionately. The life of an artist is must be very difficult when you're in pursuit of recognition. You're against so many forces. Back home, sometimes one of the things we face is sticking to professional ethics. Like they say, there's always a fraudulent part of what is good. There are business people, there are consumers, there are stakeholders in the business who might want to take the shortcut to get their needs, to get whatever they want, using the artist as a tool, especially an artist that is in their need. And these are very critical moments of reflection. You have serious responsibilities, outstanding responsibilities, and obligations at home. And you become the tightrope walker. Fall this way, fall this way. I think one of the things that serves to do is, that point into space in the future that nobody sees. Just when it's a spiritual journey, and just when you're convinced about what you're doing, hoping that this will be fair to you. Also, the efforts of the partners at home, I think, gingered us. In those days, it was not popular at all. I mean, as a matter of fact, it was a stigma to dare to be an artist, to dare to go to school to study art. I remember one of the stories that Mr. Shaw told me when he told his father he wanted to be an artist. The father asked him, of all your respected professions, that's what you've chosen. It's like you'll be on your own from now on. It's always very difficult. But those people who face those challenges and overcame, I think they develop. And when you look at the beautiful works of such people, despite those odds, it's very difficult to be creative. When you're down, when the spirit is down, but they get up and do what they have to do. I think it's more of an impulse. I remember seeing one of the works of Monet when he painted his dead wife, and I thought how harrowing that experience must have been. So we've had all kinds of experiences that make ours, more tolerable, and I think it's been the staying power. Almost when we look back, we've seen what we were able to achieve, giving birth to coming generations of artists, directly and indirectly. They come to you, their problems, you discuss. I remember on my way up, I would go to the research hall regularly in the school. At the time, I talked to my husband at home. Tessa, he grew on the job, an astute teacher, a very dedicated one, that a very, very proficient artist in the studio. He would exhibit regularly. I know another artist coming there, and things seem to be a bit difficult. I have to go to myself. How do you manage? Going to school, at the time was we had a certain period of the vice rector of the school, administrative work, lecturing, practicing. If you went into a location, you would be present almost 100% of the time. He loved lawn tennis. That was his passion. I was a bit confused. I had to talk to him. I said, how do I realize I seem to have difficulties? And he looked at me and he just saw this on the once and said, look, I use my time profitably. And I said that today it's us being regularly answer my elixir. When I'm winning in spirit, I just flash things to my mind. He's older than you, he's everything, he's busier. And get up and do something. So we go on. And also those early efforts seem to be yielding some good results today. I think there's a kind of paradox. The economy, the poverty is not so steady is hinged, fundamentally to the quality. We've had ups and downs, and probably more downs than ups. But the industry, the art industry has grown tremendously. Today, you will find an army of younger generation, being, full-time artists, and those in the school also aspiring to be like you. And the auction markets that have sprung up have helped also. We see the transition of the value of our work from almost 0 points to staggering levels, and it's encouraging and makes me more conscious of the fact that the journey of the artist really is in the work of his work, whether he's around or he's longer, because the auctions have attested to them very strongly.
Thank you. I'd like to, before I take any, go to ask comments and questions in a minute, but I'd like to ask you, Giles, who will we recognise tomorrow as the pioneers of today?
What a question. I often get asked that, a very similar question. And I always say, well, if I knew, I'd buy it myself. It is very difficult to answer that, because certainly my day job is more retrospective in that way. I look back, I'm presented with pictures, I'm presented with a collection, and my job is really to advise the collector owners of what I think they're worth, and that is normally based on precedent rather than looking forward. But that being said, I think there are some artists, and actually I would say this unequivocally, some of the artists here in this room, I think, are people who in 10 or 15 years' time will be regarded as artists of value and maintain their worth. And that is sometimes the thing, actually, is maintaining value, because an artist paints for 25 years, maybe longer, maybe 40 years, but I've seen artists work who were very highly regarded in the 60s, and now sadly are not. And they come up and they go down, and it's very difficult. So maintaining the value and maintaining reputation going forward is always a very tricky thing, and you have no control over that. But certainly, I would say that you only look around this room and see some of the artists in certain Nigeria that will be highly regarded in the future. I mean, Chris has mentioned Ghana and Matsui. I mean, he has, I say, he almost made it. He is now an artist of international repute. And again, it's dreadful to always talk commercially, but in commercial terms, his works are fetching very high sums. And I think that will continue for some time. Moving away from there, I think certainly in South Africa, we had an auction of South African art only on Wednesday this week, and once again, one of the artists that continually performs well is Jared Sokoto, who was mentioned earlier. He is, I think, an extraordinary artist, and is and was a true pioneer. I mean, he was painting very tough times up until 47 when he left South Africa, and painted some remarkable works. And certainly, those works that he painted between about 40 and 47, those ones are amongst the best, I think, that he ever painted. And certainly, he sold one for £750,000 about 2 or 3 years ago, and they are extremely good and valuable works. And I think you can get your hand even on one when he was painting in Paris in the 50s and 60s. Those will hold their value and be works that will be of great value. And it's probably rather a shame to be talking about money, but sadly that's the business I'm in.
Thanks, Giles. I think it's worth remembering, as Abiodun said, Van Gogh, a pioneer, he wasn't necessarily recognised as a pioneer in his lifetime. So, as we all know, the fortunes of artists and others, necessarily the financial in terms of recognition, often comes later than it should. Let's leave it like that. I really know I'm very aware of time, but I'd like to, the gentleman's got his hand up there, I'd like to ask any comments or questions, or perhaps you have a particular pioneer you want to make sure we know that. So, would you like to stand up?
say is, like you said, I think I don't want to agree. I want to say that this idea of saying pioneer, I don't think it's right. I think it's a kick in the teeth. I mean, our country was born in 1960, and art has been there for long. This art is contemporary, yes, it is coming through the front door, but you have works like the Nok culture, Benin, all those bronze things that were taken by the colonialists well before, and those things are sitting in other people's houses. What price are you going to give to those works when they eventually come to the table? So coming to say that these works are contemporary and this is the price, I think the works are not the price. And I think we're being cheated in the way with all due respect. I mean, our country is quite old. South Africa got independence probably after us. We were supposed to be the sixth frontline state helping South Africa. South Africa is supposed to be an industrial country. Oh yes, the prices are good. But I still think that Nigerian prices, I've looked at the works of my company. I mean, they match each other. But okay, the quality is younger, yes. You can say that, like I said, this is art coming through the front door. We have works that came through the back door and at people's houses, and those things are priceless. And where do we draw the line? Where do we say this is contemporary and this is, that's what I'm saying. Thank you.
It's my compatriots that has gingered me to talk. We don't need to be confused. When we talk about antiquities, that is where the Nok, the Benin, the Olaku, the Ife, that is where they belong. When we talk about the contemporary, I think you mentioned it. We talk about the effort of Aabru, who attended the slaves, followed by Benin, Akionlala Shekan. Those were the pioneers at the time. They taught art in schools, and some of us were beneficiaries. But their effort was not as effective, which was what affected some of us. Like he rightly said, when I told my father I was going to study art, he told me to get out of his house. And I did. A lot of us went through that at the time. Because the parents then couldn't point to many people. So the question they will ask you, so that you can be what? So that you can be like who? And so some of us had to dig and dig and dig and try to open, the eyes, of a lot of Nigerians. But that is still ongoing, because there are schools without art on their curriculum. There are parents who will not even want the children to go near art. There are children who went to study what their parents would like them to study. When they obtain the degree in medicine, in law, in engineering, they give it to the parents, and then they go back to now study art. We still have that type of situation. And artists have to swim against the tide, because it doesn't take priority. When you talk about art and culture, it's usually in the back of, well, it's not even on the back corner, it's not on the corner at all. Because the government, the institutions will tell you they have other things more serious to talk about. They will tell you there are other issues, that they need to attend to. When you talk about visual art, it's the last. I said it before, there was a minister of culture who was appointed, and people went to visit him to congratulate him. And they saw him, he was in a depressed mood. It was as if he was bereaved. of all the ministries, art and culture. My goodness. You wanted finance, you wanted works, petroleum, you wanted, now they give you art and culture. For what? So that is the problem we're facing now. And the effort of individuals here, to keep working and keep striving and keep knocking and keep reaching out. And people like Aishu coming to the rescue, to expose the works, to let people see, I have had the opportunity of coming to Europe, and I have said on several occasions I have been insulted because immediately somebody told me the work I was exhibiting were not done by me. He said he knew an artist in the south of France who did those works. Such things we have to absorb. When I took Nigerian artworks to Romania, that was in 1976. I was growing up professionally. At the opening ceremony, somebody told us, a Romanian lady, eminently, that the works couldn't have been done by Nigerians. And the Nigerian ambassador was there. And I said, Your Excellency, please, this lady, what do you do with her? Because she has just abused the whole nation. So it's ongoing. It's a great deal of effort, and we have to struggle and struggle and struggle. I exhibited in Paris. It was the same thing. But somebody commented that, look, anything from Nigeria I will respect because it's a hostile environment. You want to start work, the electricity disappears. What do? You lose your concentration. The environment, but we stick in there, we continue to push, hoping that it will get better. And it is getting better. So we just urge everyone to show more understanding, to be more open-minded, that what is coming from Africa is potentially, interesting. It's you have a lot of creative energy, running through the country, and we have not. What we are seeing is a tip of the iceberg, with a population of about 170 million. Art schools, about 150 art departments. More products are being pushed out, and they are working and striving, and a lot of them are not known, a lot of them are not seen, and we're just hoping that it will get better. Thank you.
Just saying, they normally give them the sport as well as the culture, and that keeps them a bit healthy.
I know there's a few more people wanting to say things, but I also have the signal that I have to kind of draw this to a close. And I also would like to, will forgive me, the rest of me, but I'd like to close with the voice of an artist. The one thing I have to disagree with you, it's not potentially interesting, it is interesting. And I think we would like to salute Andrew very much for holding this exhibition and for making sure that each year we're seeing new artists, perhaps some of the same artists, and we have these kind of occasions to learn more what it's like to be working in Nigeria, but also some of the concerns that the artists are working with. So thank you very much indeed for coming, and thank you Andrew.
The is going to continue tomorrow, and also you have the photos on the other side. And I would like to take some time to say thank you to all of you, and to all of you for coming here. Remember, you are the pioneers. Take out your inner Peggy with night, connect with your Medicis on fire, and enjoy a living legacy. Thank you so much.